It may not have been the first MMORPG ever, but World of Warcraft was the game that put this genre at the forefront of pop culture and into the mainstream. In true Blizzard fashion, they took an existing formula, greatly refined it, added some excellent marketing, and voila! We got the game that changed the face of gaming forever. And as with any commercially successful video game, the company behind it capitalized on this popularity by adding expansions. As of right now, World of Warcraft has received 7 expansions, so we figured now would be a good time to go through them and see how exactly this game developed into what it is today. Technically, vanilla World of Warcraft is not an expansion. This is the base game that launched in 2004 to massive success. But we figured we should say a couple of words about the original game, if only to have enough context to see what the subsequent expansions changed. Vanilla World of Warcraft was a very interesting game. Naturally, it's the version of World of Warcraft that is dearest to most of the people who had played it, but story-wise, it's quite detached from the rest of the Warcraft universe. Or rather, it's more inconsequential. To put things in perspective, Warcraft 3 was a huge success and already a fan-favorite game to many RTS gamers. World of Warcraft may be the biggest MMORPG that ever was, but nobody could have predicted its success. Blizzard certainly didn't, so the devs didn't really dabble in continuing the Warcraft story from where the Frozen Throne left off. Instead, the game gave players a fully fleshed out world that was massive, and the ability to play as part of either the Alliance or the Horde. Each faction featured 4 races and 8 classes. However, since both the Alliance and the Horde each had one exclusive class, there were 9 classes in total: Warrior, Mage, Rogue, Warlock, Priest, Shaman, Hunter, Paladin, and Druid. The game was simply brimming with content, and as hard as other developers tried, and many have tried, no one came close to replicating the success that was World of Warcraft. It was also very complex from a mechanical standpoint, and it took things like class identity very seriously. But to list all the features that made vanilla World of Warcraft what it is would take at least a full video. So let's just move on. Approximately 2 years after the release of World of Warcraft, we got the first expansion pack in the form of the Burning Crusade. For better or for worse, Blizzard no longer had any reservations about continuing the mainline Warcraft story through their new MMO rather than a new RTS game. Naturally, gamers were excited that Illidan, one of the most popular Warcraft 3 characters, was going to be the endgame raid boss. Many other Frozen Throne characters made their appearances as well, and the game world was expanded to include Outland. The game also introduced many mechanical changes, adding 2 new races, flying mounts, jewel crafting, new abilities, and 10 more levels, putting the level cap at 70. Things that weren't changed were revisited, like the talent system and the classes. TVC may not have added any new classes to the game, but it did make it so that paladins and shamans were no longer faction exclusive. And most importantly, the game added resilience as a new stat. Resilience mitigated the damage players took from other players, making it easier to balance both PvP and PvE without busting either. Lastly, we mustn't forget that the Burning Crusade was the expansion that gave us arena PvP for the first time. All in all, the Burning Crusade was a step in the right direction, adding more content and refining existing mechanics while tying the world and the Warcraft into a cohesive whole. In retrospect, we would have loved to see how the Warcraft story would have evolved in the RTS format. If nothing else, we're sure that some of our main characters would have received better development and more satisfying conclusions to their arcs, instead of their story being concluded at the hands of no-name adventurers hunting for loot. Regardless though, the Burning Crusade showed us that World of Warcraft, enormous as it was, still had room to grow, in terms of content as well as in popularity and file size. Making sure you had enough room on your hard drive to play this game back in 2007 Seeing as the players were indeed prepared to face off against Illidan, it was time to introduce a new big baddie. And if you wanted to up the stakes, there was only one character to turn to, Arthas, or should we say the Lich King. This widely beloved anti-hero from the Frozen Throne is considered by many to be the face of Warcraft. So while again we're sorry now that we got him and had to kill him so early on, we were still excited to have Arthas in World of Warcraft. So what did the Wrath of the Lich King add to the game? Well, there was the usual fare, a new region in the form of Northland, 10 more levels, inscription as a new profession, new spells, zones, dungeons, all the good stuff. Additionally, the expansion saw the introduction of the first hero class in the form of the Death Knight. Don't let the term hero class confuse you though. They weren't more powerful than the other classes, but they did have a more unique story, starting off at level 55 instead of 1 in their very own instance zone of Lordaeron. The Wrath of the Lich King is World of Warcraft at its peak, and there is a good reason for this. The story was still very interesting and emotionally engaging, given that everything you did led to a culmination where you faced the most beloved character in Warcraft. The PvE was good, with plenty of interesting raids and Northend as one of the areas that you truly wanted to explore instead of just grinding through to get to max level. But this expansion also spelled a huge improvement for PvP. Sure, the rogues were still a pain to go up against and the paladins were stronger than ever, but each class had many viable builds, and with 2 more battlegrounds and arenas added into the mix, there was enough variety to keep you coming back. The game was also more streamlined than ever, with stuff like Dungeon Finder added to make life easier for players. But the game still wasn't simplified enough to the point where the world felt small. And finally, Wrath of the Lich King gave us the most epic cinematic trailer ever. Getting to see Arthas in action for the first time in years, complete with magnificent music and brilliantly juxtaposed narration, was enough to give us goosebumps. It still is, actually. And then came Cataclysm. The expansion changed not only the in-game world of Azeroth, but the face of the game and its community as a whole. This was the point where the fans who rejoiced that Illidan and Arthas had made their way to World of Warcraft so soon wished that they didn't, and were left scratching their heads and asking, what now? Having killed off 2 of the most prominent characters from Warcraft 3, Blizzard turned to older games for its villain. And next on the chopping block was Deathwing. Hardcore fans who were heavily invested in the lore of Warcraft found some reasons to be optimistic, but most players didn't feel any sort of emotional attachment to Deathwing. Needless to say, the fan base could not keep growing. But what was the expansion like, we hear you ask? Well, so many things were changed that the game became unrecognizable to some. In addition to standard changes like the higher level cap, new races, new zones, and new battlegrounds, pretty much everything in the game got a revamp. We already mentioned that Deathwing changed the face of Azeroth, but this wasn't just a cosmetic change. Many of the quests were no longer available. Also, you could actually use flying mounts in Azeroth, which made the ever-expanding world feel smaller than ever. But what's more, all existing classes were redesigned and rebalanced, and the talent tree was completely revamped to grant special abilities based on a character's primary talent tree. As you can imagine, this is when the outcry for vanilla servers really picked up steam. Sure, guild leveling was a cool new feature, but many players disliked how the RPG elements were slowly being phased out of the game, with every class being able to do pretty much anything and everything being instantly accessible. And then came Mists of Pandaria, an expansion that many players considered a joke. And considering that this expansion focused on a race that had literally been introduced as an April's Fool's joke, who can blame them? The Pandaren were, however, the most unique race in that they started off neutral and could then join either the Alliance or the Horde, which is solely down to the player to decide. Also, after the death of Deathwing, Blizzard decided not to throw more disposable bad guys at us and instead focused the expansion around the conflict between the Alliance and the Horde. Despite initially coming off as a meme, the expansion was loads of fun and many consider it to be a step up from Cataclysm, which was definitely a good sign. In fact, the biggest criticism was the introduction of the Pandaren, as some fans simply didn't feel like they belonged in Azeroth. Aesthetically, the new zones were unlike anything else in Azeroth, and they were filled to the brim with new content. We got a new class in the Monk who blended tankiness, healing, and DPS all all-in-one, and scenarios, which were basically 3-man dungeons. And of course, there were the mandatory changes, which no longer included just an increased level cap and some new spells, but major strides to streamline the game. This time it came in the form of the talent system, which was revamped to offer active bonuses once every 15 levels instead of the passive bonuses that the game had so far. Those who were down with the change argued that the old talent system basically only gave you the illusion of customizability, since there were only 2 to 3 viable builds for every class. But while there's certainly no denying this, the end result was, once again, a genuine RPG mechanic being phased out. We did get the Pokemon-esque pet battles though, so, you know, pros and cons. Where do we begin with this one? Many would argue that Warlords of Draenor was doomed from the start. The moment time travel is introduced as a plot device, especially to retcon certain events in the past, most stories lose their integrity. However, despite the confusing mess that the time travel elements of the story were, the main questline was very intriguing, and getting to see the whole world of the orcs was a real treat. But the expansion still ended up falling flat on its face. One of the mechanics that the fans were most excited about were the garrisons. The garrisons were supposed to be customizable fortresses that players could develop. This was intended to be a fun new mechanic that would pay homage to the Warcraft 3 of old, where you had to build and then defend your base. But the developers overhyped it and then failed to deliver, restricting the locations for these garrisons among other things. So one of the 2 big things coming to Warlords was a mess, and no one really liked it. What about the other one? Well, the other big thing was the graphics update. Since World of Warcraft went for a cartoonish art style instead of aiming for photorealism, the game could manage to refrain from graphics updates for a whole decade better than most, but not indefinitely. And the improved graphics from Warlords are amazing. The game looked new and exciting while still retaining that Warcraft character, but graphics aren't content, which ultimately ended up being the bane of this expansion and why it's unanimously held as the worst World of Warcraft expansion ever. It just didn't offer enough content. Sure, the level cap was increased and we got skirmishes and a new world PvP zone, but it just wasn't enough to keep the high interest that World of Warcraft has always enjoyed. The numbers reflect this as well, with the player base being reduced to an all-time low. Okay, pretend that we're Blizzard for a moment, and we're just coming off the heels of Warlords' poor reception. We ask ourselves the question, how do we get players excited again? Why, we make a fan favorite character the poster boy for the new expansion, of course. But you might be thinking, hold on, Blizzard, didn't you kill all of our favorite characters almost a decade ago? We sure did, but now that we've introduced time travel and alternate realities, we can do whatever we want, and we want Illidan. We want Illidan to tell the players that they are not prepared to quit World of Warcraft yet. Also, we'll give the players Sargeras. They wanted Sargeras, we'll give them Sargeras. Okay, we're no longer Blizzard now. And if it sounds like we're complaining, trust us, we're not. Legion was a love letter to Warcraft fans, a game absolutely radiating with content, life, and fan service. We got the second hero class in the form of the Demon Hunters, we got class orders offering unique class-specific campaigns and rewards, the Broken Isles were simply inspired, the endgame was more diverse than ever, and there were just loads for you to do, either as a casual or hardcore player. The loot was aplenty, the customizable artifact weapons were incredible, everything was good. And the game looked amazing thanks to the graphics update from World of Draenor. This expansion may not rank all that highly on many expansion polls, but we can't help but feel that the reason for this is simply because a large part of the player base had already left World of Warcraft by this point, or were simply too blinded by nostalgia. In many ways, Legion represents a high point for the franchise, the likes of which we haven't had since Wrath of the Lich King. And that leads us to the last expansion, the Battle for Azeroth. Much like Cataclysm, this expansion had some huge shoes to fit, but we definitely prefer the approach taken in the Battle of Azeroth from the one we had in Cataclysm. The events of Legion have left the world profoundly changed, but the matter of this change is not as oppressive as Deathwing's destruction of every zone you held dear to your heart. Instead, it introduces gameplay mechanics that stem from these changes, like the introduction of Azerite. Also, instead of trying to up the stakes with an even bigger world-destroying supervillain, if such a thing would even even be possible this time around, the game takes a more relaxed approach, once again putting the conflict between the Alliance and the Horde at the forefront. As such, there is a naturally heavy emphasis on PvP. In fact, for the first time ever, players can toggle PvP on and off, regardless of realm type. But this isn't to say that the PvE aspect was forgone. Warfronts were introduced as new massive PvE scenarios. These scenarios are very reminiscent of Warcraft's RTS days, in a good way, and the new zones of Kultiras and Zandalar are both very well done. So while it may not reach the same heights as Legion did, the Battle of Azeroth is still a great expansion that leaves you wanting more. And that about does it for World of Warcraft expansions for now, at least looking forward. There will certainly be more expansions to come, but instead of speculating what they may be like, we'd like to take a moment to look back. After all, there's no better time to look back than this summer. We've mentioned many times that as each new expansion rolled out, new mechanics were added and old ones revamped to make the game more streamlined. But now more than ever, many World of Warcraft fans are yearning for the good old days of class identity, looming danger, and persistent reputations. The first posts asking whether Blizzard was going to release vanilla servers which would run the game as it was prior to the first expansion date back to pretty much the day of the Burning Crusade's release. But they've already picked up steam after the release of Cataclysm, and while Blizzard remained adamant that they would not be offering this ever, they've finally relented. The World of Warcraft Classic is set to launch August 27th. So if you want to experience what World of Warcraft was in its infancy, you can finally do it on a genuine Blizzard server. Why would you want to play vanilla World of Warcraft instead of Battle of Azeroth is a topic that warrants its own video, and we could make it if that's what you want to see. Just let us know in the comments. But for now, let's just say that these two games would be immensely different. There are many things that World of Warcraft in its current state does better than vanilla did. The storytelling is vastly improved, the experience is more accessible, the quests are more diverse and well written, the list goes on. But it also makes you feel like a central character in an overarching story. You are the hero. And in vanilla World of Warcraft, you were very much not the hero. You were just a random adventurer. Here are just some charms of vanilla World of Warcraft. Two mobs that were the same level as you could easily kill you. You had to walk everywhere until level 40 or pay for public transportation. There were no dungeon finders, so you had to walk to the dungeon entrance together with people you assembled in order to clear the dungeon. Gold had real value and you were broke most of the time. Item rarity actually meant something, and the list goes on. If these things sound like inconveniences, then maybe classic World of Warcraft is not for you. But they all made the world incredibly immersive and your achievements feel more rewarding. In these two aspects, modern World of Warcraft can't even hold a candle to vanilla. But that's it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and consider sharing it if this is something you feel your friends ought to know. Also, if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure to click on the bell icon so that you don't miss any new videos as they get uploaded. And finally, we'd like to know which expansion was your favorite and why, so let us know down in the comments. In the meantime, may your days be long and your hardships few, as the Draenor would say, and we'll see you next time on Gaming Scan.